Hi guys, this is a video just breaking down the rubric, I guess for final checkpoints and maybe revision for some students who know that their draft could have had a little bit more detail and more focus regarding the intention of the task. In terms of the example that I'll be using, it can be found on OneNote and accessible, and in truth I'm only going to be looking at the short introduction and outline of the intention of the task and the first paragraph, which I've color coded to reflect the rubric, which should appear below. Okay. So the first thing we're going to note is that, well, one, the student has correctly formatted, but they have a simple, short, good morning, everyone. They acknowledge the traditional owners of the land because they are speaking from Marcus Zuzak's perspective at Adelaide Writers Week. Okay, I've suggested where possible to actually use COVID to reflect where students might be presenting as a webinar or podcast, but you need to acknowledge that for context, otherwise your transcript doesn't make sense. If you jump in and it sounds just like an essay that you're reading, you're not taking on the persona or the stylistic conventions, as we'll look at the rubric, of the assigned task. Likewise, if you're writing from a student's perspective as a cheat sheet, and unless you're actually speaking to a fellow student or potentially as a teacher, that is not being made clear. So please reflect on that. We'll have a quick read of the student's example. So they make the good morning, the traditional owners. I'm Marcus Zuzak, and I'd like to thank you for coming to my retrospective during Writers' Week in Adelaide State Library on my international bestseller, The Messenger. Even now, 20 years after its release, I'm still asked about the importance of perspective and identity and how selflessness can ultimately help self-growth. The student has cleverly put the ideas or themes there within their address as Zuzak. They use the personal pronoun I. And this will actually help with the stylistic conventions as noted in yellow. After all, you've all read my novel, so we now know who the specific audience are, which is also allowed for through the context of Adelaide Writers Week. You have all read my novel and are keen to hear how both myself and the fictional, that should be character, not charter, Ed Kennedy, but they are acknowledging the character. Many of you are just jumping straight into your themes and not even addressing Ed Kennedy, grew from experience whereby even the most ordinary people can be remarkable and live beyond their capabilities. So it's short, it's sharp, it's shiny. You'll see that there's actually very little mention of theme in this example. I know the other example on OneNote has it, okay, and fair enough. If you're using that, be careful not to use too much of it, but the other example does state themes and sub-themes. What you do want to avoid, though, is simply restating a theme like belonging without actually stating what you, as Marcus Zuzak, or you as the student who is talking about what Marcus Zuzak wanted about belonging. Is it how we create a sense of belonging by connecting to community? Is it how we find a sense of belonging by completing or helping others in times of need? Okay, so let's look at this example. And what I'll do is I'm going to now delete the top. That way we can kind of get a paired look at the rubric if this works. Come on, one more. There we go. Okay. Now this is a bit small, but you'll have access to this and you can look at it. But the truth is that I've tried to color code where the performance standards are being met. This means that we're looking at knowledge and understanding where there's a comprehensive knowledge and understanding of ideas and perspectives in a range of text. Okay. Let's have a look at these first, actually. That way we have a bit of context, funnily enough, as to what we're looking at here. But I'll still try and pair them up side by side. So, and that's just one paragraph. So, comprehensive knowledge and understanding of ideas and perspectives in a range of text. What this means is, at an A level, a student should be able to show a specific idea or theme is addressed within a body paragraph and not just stated. So, as evidenced before, you're not saying, I'm going to explore, or one theme that I wanted to explore was belonging. What about belonging did you as Marcus Zuzak want? So make sure that it's not just stated, because that doesn't show a comprehensive knowledge and understanding of the idea, or rather the perspective, which we'll talk about in a moment. Typically, this idea, or if we're going to call it a theme, is stated in the topic sentence, but it's also constantly referred to after each quote through the intention of what you, as the author, if you're writing it, wanted the reader to think and feel about that. If you just state the topic or the idea at the start and never again through the body paragraph, or if you just mention it tokenistically by stating it as one word or a statement, you're not showing depth. And actually what we'll do is we'll have a quick pop-up here, and visually you can see that this student talked about moral dilemmas, hoping to provoke the reader to consider how small acts of kindness can have an everlasting effect. It's mentioned in the topic sentence, but they expand upon it with each example. He has difficult decisions to make. That's a dilemma. A large magnitude of moral dilemmas, and then acknowledging that Ed has to face more than one moral dilemma. They then talk about something being morally wrong, which we'll read through. It's about then using one of the examples to have the reader reflect on their own moral judgment, so putting it back onto the reader. Only then to have another dilemma of taking one's life to save another person's life. These are all varied examples about having moral dilemmas, but they're actually expanded upon, or rather being shown as something where the idea is stated in the topic sentence but constantly referred to and expanded upon. This is where an A range will have comprehensive knowledge of the theme and idea, okay, which is supported or shown through discussion in a number of ways, as noted, in a range of text. So 3 to 4 techniques that the author employs. These are often mentioned as language features, stylistic features, conventions used in the text. This is everything that we have looked at in terms of these techniques and so much more. This is why, at a basis, you're asked to look at 3 themes, 1 per paragraph, or at least one that you develop, and at least 3 examples. That's giving you a chance at showing a range. You don't have to have all of them, but you do need to have a comprehensive understanding of 3 to 4 throughout. Here, we know that they're shown because, well, just in this paragraph alone, if we look at all the blue, metafiction, we have direct address, we have internal thoughts, we have personification, we have breaking the fourth wall, we have, well, dialogue again, but pleading, so not just say dialogued. There's also juxtapose, which should be in a cheeky bold if we're going to be pedantic, which I am, and of course, internal thought. But here we can already see, and this is even before we look at it, whether or not it's explained comprehensively, a chance at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at least. I have said that if you do 3 well-explained examples that show your understanding over the course of the actual transcript, not just 1 paragraph, you will be able to meet that A mark. But it's as to the knowledge and understanding of those techniques and their intention in relation to the theme. This means that the idea theme, as noted, is clearly stated, but the perspective of what the author believes about the idea and therefore wants the reader to think and feel is stated. This is where as Zuzak, and because of this assignment, you are saying what you want the readers to think and feel about the moral dilemma. This means that we have statements such as to help the reader reflect and compel them to understand his difficult decisions, but also both the safety and guilt they have as an observer. Or to suggest that even though killing a man for rape may be justifiable, it is morally wrong. Or that Ed's predicament, whether fictional or real, will remind the casual observer or reader of their own unique challenges in life. This is where the student isn't just saying it's about belonging, but rather, as indicated in the performance standard, they're clearly stating the perspective of what the author wants them to think and feel. This is where, speaking as the author, you can say, I wanted, or I would hope that the reader understood. Some of you are using Whiplash as a guide, but not using that formal voice as the author, or even as a student where you're saying Zuzak wants. So be mindful of that. But remember that to get this A band, you need to acknowledge the idea and theme with variation, but also what the reader may think or feel. It's ter at a basis. We then have a thorough knowledge and understanding of the ways in which these ideas are presented. And this is once again with the stylistic meaning with regards to the using 3 or 4, but having 3 or 4 within a body paragraph. So 3 times 3 is 9 at a basis, but also to make sure that your techniques are embedded. So this is where we have the reference to the techniques. A quote isn't just given and forgotten. Something isn't just said that it's personified, but is explained. So we have, when Ed confronts the rapist, I personified his conscience as the air of invincibility has deserted me, to suggest that even though killing a man for rape may be justifiable, it is morally wrong because it's left him. Many of you use the bed cried in pain, but you leave it and say it's personified, but say nothing more as to what that's meant to convey to the reader. So please be mindful of that. But overall, this is the knowledge and understanding. You can still be in the A band and show this using these ideas, but it still relies upon your analysis, which we'll talk about, and the application. Looking at the analysis, we have perceptive analysis of those language features. This means that you are referencing the language techniques and conventions in your examples, but how you're talking about them. This means for each one, there's an intended effect on the reader. So I might as well go color that pink, okay, in relation to the idea and theme, which should be red. We then have a perceptive analysis. This means, and perceptive, and this is where the definition comes into play, it's not you stating what the technique is. A moderator should know what personification is. A moderator will know what metafiction is. It all depends on whether or not you have shown a perceptive analysis by 1, using the correct term, 2, using an example, 3, explaining the intended effect on the reader, so that a moderator can understand in that little cheeky idea, technique, evidence, reader, response, or intended effect. The perception then comes into you talking about concepts rather than technique. So if we jump to this one here, the moral dilemma of murdering the rapist was intended to be juxtaposed. That means contrasted, complete different, to Ed's personal dilemma about professing his love to Audrey. I aim to have the audience relate to Ed's struggles through his romantic relationship where Audrey insists, "You're my best friend, Ed," only to have Ed reflect that, drawing upon the idea of taking someone's life and using a gun, you can kill a man with those words. After all, being put in the friend zone or dying from a broken heart can be worse than staring down the barrel of a gun. So there's a bit of tongue-in-cheek there from the student who pretended to be Zuzak in terms of what would be worse. But it once again compares the moral dilemmas of a personal romantic dilemma to taking someone's life. This is where perceptive analysis. Remember, if you're using at least 3 examples in each of your paragraphs and you're having a go, you can still be perceptive. Even if 2 out of the 3 work, but 1 misfires, it's still perceptive overall. It all depends on the range of techniques, the examples, and of course, embedding the quotes, explaining them, and not making sure that they're just simply being restated as belonging, or this helps show that Ed feels is searching for his identity. So be specific. The final point is application. And this once again relates to the versatile and precise use of language and stylistic features to create a wide range of coherent texts that address the purpose, audience, and context. This is not about you analyzing technique. It's about you using the conventions of, well, a speech, a transcript, all that awful stuff that I've been teaching from the get-go about formal present tense, literary voice, and of course, formatting. Okay, now half the formatting is gone here. I don't need to remind you, check out the other video. But this is where we actually have to take into account or mark against the following. A student's work either as the author or student or chosen persona, if you were to do something else, uses the correct language, formal or informal. This can be informal, but it also has to use, well, certain features, such as addressing the audience and the context in which the presentation is set. If you just say, "Hi, I'm Marcus Zuzak, I'm here talking about the messenger," where's the context as to why? How have you given in a brief moment that it's a webinar, that you've addressed COVID, that you're actually considering who your audience is in this hypothetical transcript? A student's work uses the correct perspective and remains within it. Some of you start off as Marcus Zuzak, but then will go back to a formal essay. How are you remaining as that persona in how you write and from what perspective? This then comes into play with the yellow and the examples that I'm about to show you. A student uses the various language and stylistic features, okay, such as identifying their chosen audience. So this means that are you saying you, the reader, my fans, or rather just saying you to them, okay, using the correct terminology and directly addressing them throughout the transcript. And in truth, this should be yellow as well. But if we go back and have a look, we can say, I repeatedly harassed Ed. So there's the formal of I, Zuzak, not Zuzak repeatedly harasses Ed, because that's not you writing as Zuzak if you're pretending to be. I sporadically implemented, I intended to use. So there's always an intention, or I want the reader. More importantly, as we look at this, we have questions being asked. Some of you, I've asked you to ask a question to lead in. You want to vary this because if a presenter is talking, they're not always going to just be giving examples. They're going to be using those examples through asking questions, such as, after all, isn't my purpose as a writer to have my readers relate to the main character? Therefore, I intended to have Ed face, or when Ed confronts the rapist, this is where I intentionally broke the fourth wall. I'm talking to you, the reader. Okay, so there's a number of elements here that we can see that the student is actually using the correct terminology and persona of the author. This means that they might throw in a rhetorical question, direct address, they might make open statements to engage their chosen audience. What separates this from the whiplash? That's what I ask you, and that's what you could consider. You don't do it just to fill up time. You should always choose technique over doing this, but there should be a way where asking a question actually proves a point about what you, the author, wanted to say, or want the reader to think and feel. After all, being put in the friend zone or dying from a broken heart can be worse than staring down the barrel of a gun. We then round out with the multimodal presentation. This is just suggesting how you might use some of those techniques talked about in the first video about proper formatting, imagery, not overcrowding a PowerPoint or making it look too busy. So refer to the how to format video to be aware of this. I think for the time and effort, putting or making a PowerPoint is useful, just to be sure that you are giving the moderators every chance to look for what's there, rather than just listening to your voice and reading the transcript. This is a doozy because it's always been there. It always will be. We are responding to text. We need to prove that we have actually read the text. This means that you are fluently integrating use of evidence from the text to develop and support a response. This can be plot, this can be recounting, but it actually also refers to, especially at A level, embedding examples and quotes. This means that sentence structure is considered. You're not just dropping a quote in. This means that you're using the quote within your statement. I sporadically implemented metafiction throughout the novel, such as Ed accusing the reader of safely reading while he has the difficult decisions to make. So that still relates to moral decisions, but that's the end of the quote. If we jump to another one, personified his conscience as the air of invincibility has deserted me. Some of you are using 2 to 3 sentences that are too long, and to fluently integrate as evidence through the PowerPoint on how to embed quotes, wherever it may be. Where is it? Created by the great Miss Zilm. It's showing you how to do that. This is what gets an A level. It's A level. Okay? And this is something that we practiced with Whiplash. It's something that we practiced with the YouTube comparison. It's something that you'll have to do in your comparison to stand out. So please make sure that you're looking back through your final revision before you record and go, am I embedding that quote? It'll help cut words, it'll help with fluency, it'll help show your voice as the author or student. The final one relates to sophisticated use of clear, accurate, and fluent expression. This is correct tense, consistent tense throughout the transcript. This is about using grammar, syntax, and punctuation. I've seen a number of examples where simple spelling mistakes have gone unaddressed. Reread through your work, get your computer to read it, get a friend to read it, because people are misspelling Ed's name. They're not capitalizing, they're not finishing sentences. This all relates to, if you're searching for that upper echelon A or A+, the application. This also means, regardless, you're all recording an oral about how well you speak, how clearly you speak, how long you speak for, because 6 minutes is, well, 6 minutes, as they say. So please be mindful of this. I've always suggested that you read through it. If you have to, get rid of an example. Usually the example that you don't really think about is the one that you left to last in the paragraph. Where can you get rid of one where you're speaking too much about one example? Or where is there an example that doesn't actually relate to the idea and theme? I hope this rubric has been useful, or rather this video, because it will be made available for you to review in your final, I guess, week and, well, hopefully week and a half before you upload both your transcript and your recorded oral, whether as a MP3 or multimodal. All the best, guys, and I'll see you this week.